It is Tuesday, April 18th, and it's 4 p.m. I'm going to call this meeting to order, and Kira, if you would call the roll.
Commissioner Tompkins?
Here.
Commissioner Wilson?
Here.
Commissioner Inscore?
Here.
Chair Short?
I am here. If you guys would all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time we'll entertain any public comment. Any member of the public may address the Solid Waste Management Authority on any matter on or off the agenda. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes to make their comment. Is there any public comment at this time? Do we have anybody online? We have no public online. Thank you. Moving on to our consent agenda, we have item 1.1, which is the approval of the minutes from the regular session Tuesday, the 21st of March. 1.2 is approve the request from the Yurok tribe to waive hauling and disposal fees for 2 authority allocated dumpsters and disposal fees for 2 other 20 cubic yard bins in support of the 22nd annual Klamath River cleanup to be held May 6th. Item 1.3 is approved payment of claim number 9508 for invoice 4007 in the amount of $12,128 to Harshwall and Company LLP for audit services. And item 1.4, approved budget transfer in the amount of $13,655.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
And we have a second. Kira, you get to pick on who that second was. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing no public comment, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the board. Would you poll the vote, please?
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Thank you. All right, Mr. Ward, Director's reports.
Thank you, Chair Short. So we have some community events coming up, which I'd like everybody to know about. First, in the city, Crescent City residents are, that's within the defined city limits, are eligible to participate in the annual clean sweep, I think it's called. But the city crews will collect yard debris on May 30th and 31st. On May 30th, north of 9th Street and, 9th Street and south of 9th on May 30th and north of 9th Street on May 31st. And they ask that the pile sizes be 6 feet or smaller in size and that each of the limbs be 6 feet or length and the maximum diameter of any limbs being 4 inches. So if you have any further questions about that, Crescent City residents can give a call to the city at 464-9506, extension 226. We also have an event up in Gasky. The Gasky Neighbors Helping Neighbors is doing a fuels reduction event. So this is brush only, no blackberry vines, tansy ragwort, Scotch broom, pampas grass, or English ivy. Again, 6-foot lengths or smaller, maximum 6-inch diameter, and that's May 5th and 6th from 10 to 2 at the Gasky American Legion Hall. And then Recology customers, that means if you've subscribed for collection services and they come to your house and regularly pick up trash, then you can call 464-4181 before April 28th, and they'll be doing a brush collection at no additional charge to those customers between May 1st and May 6th by appointment. So you do need to call by April 28th, and that number is 464-4181. Thank you for approving the consent agenda. Other items that we'll be talking about include the rates, some efforts to control trespassing at the Crescent City landfill, and some discussion of legislation. And with that, I'd be happy to move on to the financials or answer any other questions. There is also attached to the director's report a letter of support for the Tolowadeni Nation's request for infrastructure improvements. This is similar to a letter we sent during the first round, and I consulted with the chair, and we agreed that it would be appropriate to send another letter supporting that effort.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Any questions or comments? Well, let's move on with the financials then.
Looking at item 2.2, that's our cash flow report. We have 1.98 million in the bank plus 198,000 for last month's rent. Looking at the AR aging summary, you can see Kathy Brewer keeps our accounts pretty current. There's just one account that's over 90 days past due, but we're working on that one. Looking at the claims approved by directors report on item 2.3, once again you can see our largest expense goes to Hamburg WSG for the good services they provide at the Del Norte County Transfer Station, and our second largest expense is to the Del Norte County Auditor for the debit and credit card services, because debit and credit cards continue to be a major part of our customer transactions at the Del Norte County Transfer Stations. Moving on to item 2.4, our cash flow at the Del Norte County Transfer Station, and moving at 2.5, you can see that currently our tip fees are $71,496 ahead of budget, and our franchise fees are $50,529 ahead of budget. So at this point in our fiscal year, we are $122,000 ahead of budget. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Seeing no questions, we'll move right along.
All right then. This next item is discussing security issues at the Crescent City landfill. So Rachel, if I could have that PowerPoint. Nice, okay.
Thought we were going to have music with this presentation. Dave, thank you for that.
All right. So we continue to have trespassing issues. On Wednesday, March 29th, staff encountered an encampment, including an RV, a vehicle, and extensive tarping on the northern portion of the Crescent City landfill. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So what staff are proposing is that we would like to install some additional K-rails. There's two vehicular access roads where those trespass are indicated. We'd like to block those off. We'd like to add an additional K-rail to the K-rail wall that's along Heights Access Road. We'd like to place one other K-rail blocking off a road that's being used to access Heights Access Road. We figure we can do all of this for less than $6,000, but are eager to get started because we don't want further trespassers or campers in that location. And Kira and Michael were specifically out there during this time, and they might have further information to report.
Any questions or comments for?
My only
Go ahead.
question, Kara, is what's going to stop them from coming along the power lines and just? I mean, obviously the vegetation is big enough there that you're probably not going to get a car through there. But do we have trails extensively that go all the way back to the power line through there?
Absolutely. And these are bottle points that will hinder and help mitigate, but it's not 100%. It's just the best we can do, and we might have to keep finding, as they saw down new trees and create new paths, we might have to put more K-rails to stop them.
Just another thought, and I don't know I don't know if this is a Pacific Power question or whether that easement, if we can put some kind of gate across that as well, along as Pacific Power has keys and access to it. It's just another really big open area that allows for access basically all the way to the
Our hope is that if by placing these K-rails, that will really impede the access, because if you could look at the map before you, right along that yellow line is indicating where the power lines are, and so there is an access road that parallels the power lines, but Shortly past that point, it really turns into wetlands that are impassable by any vehicle.
Yeah.
So you can see that they go along the dotted lines. So our hope is that, and there is a barbed wire fence at that point that seems to be working. We have discussed at various points the possibility of putting in a gate at that location, and essentially it's problematic because there's a lot of open space.
Right.
So gating that whole area isn't very practical. So our hope is that by blocking off those access points by which they can drive through, that they'll have less of a motivation to go in there at all.
Makes sense. Thank
Sin-
you.
And since that barbed wire fence has been up, and also since Pacific Power has no longer gone through themselves, making it an accessible looking road, that hasn't been used.
Good.
So
All right.
that's been very good.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, it looks like, I mean, on the map, it looks like a road that is relatively passable, so
Yeah,
that
they
was a
just-
great question. I had the same
They come through
question.
Heights access now.
Okay. Any other
But we do
questions?
need action from the board on this item, because
Understand.
we are looking for an expense that's above $5,000.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Ward? Okay, we'll open this up for public comment. At this time, is there any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing no public comment, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board. Looking for a motion.
Chair, I'd make a motion that we direct staff to procure the 6 20-foot K-rail barriers and have them delivered and put them in the places as noted on the map.
We have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
And a second. Kira, would you poll the vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Okay. Moving right along.
Thank you.
Okay, 4.1, discussion of possible action regarding transfer station operations change order 32, adjusting service fee adjustments based on charges to the consumer price index. Mr. Ward?
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate that. And next slide, please. Oops. Okay. Oops. I'm sorry, I don't have a mouse. Oh, there we go. So since we last talked, negotiations have occurred both with Hambro WSG and with Recology. Essentially, this is similar to what you saw last time, but we now have the actual CPIU index for March. So the actual change of CPI since 2021 for Hambro's contract is 13.95%. But even with the above the 4% approval, the combined changes since 2021 for Hambro's has been 5.1%. This results in looking at the customer rates. We project a customer rate of $179.82 per ton starting in July 2023. This is an increase of $4.82. But most disposal fees at the transfer station increased by less than 3%. And Hambro did have some outstanding concerns that they felt weren't addressed by these negotiations, and so we have a letter attached to this agenda item. Next slide, please. So looking at how these changes hit the customer, you can see that the change. You can see the current rates in the yellow column, the projected rates effective July 1st, 2023 in the blue column. So the first table is for the Del Norte County Transfer Station, and you can see the rate increases are all less than 3%. And then the table below is for the Gasky and Klamath transfer stations, where we charge by the cubic yard. And again, you can see most of those rate increases as being less than 3%. There are additional choices for the board to make. Next slide. So currently, the minimum charge at the Del Norte County Transfer Station is $9 for up to 100 pounds. So in addition to setting the rates for Recology and for Hambro, the board also sets the minimum rates for the customers. And so currently, we're receiving $9 for up to 100 pounds, and so we pay Hambro WSG $8.75 to manage those 100 pounds. So that gives the authority revenue of 25 cents per that particular transaction. So with these rate changes, the $9 for up to 100 pounds would just give the authority revenue of just a penny for that transaction. So we're suggesting that either the board go for $9 for up to 80 pounds in the coming year, or $9.25 for up to 100 pounds. Either way you want to go, it's fine by us. But that's what we'll be looking at. So I think the easiest thing to do is probably $9.25 for up to 100 pounds. But that's a discretionary choice. And next slide, please. Setting the minimum charge at Gasky and Klamath. Similarly, it's worth reminding the board that both the Gasky and the Klamath transfer stations lose money. The revenues that we receive do not match the expenses for those facilities, and even for our minimum charge, the cost to dispose of up to 3 cans costs us $10.59, even though our minimum charge is $10. So right now, for everybody who brings in 3 cans and we charge them $10, we're paying 59 cents because they come to the right place and we want the services to continue. So our recommendation would be that you move up to $11 for up to 3 cans. While this gives a very modest income to the authority, it's a $1 increase, and it's nice not to have the extra coins in the Klamath and Gasky transfer stations. So staff's recommendation is to approve this change order based on 100% of the changes to CPIU during the last year, and to set the minimum charges at both the Del Norte County Transfer Station and the Gasky and Klamath transfer stations.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Is there any questions or comments from any of the authority or board members? Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing no public comment, I'll bring it back to the board. And in our staff report, we've grouped together 4.1 and 4.2, so I'll take up.
I'll bring up the issues on 4.2 next.
Right. So I was going to take up the first 2 recommendations on 4.1, and that is to set the minimum charge at the Del Norte County Transfer Station to be $9.25 for up to 100 pounds, and the minimum charge at the Klamath and Gasky transfer stations to be $11 for up to 3 31-gallon cans of trash. And item 2 would be approve the change order 32 with Hambro WSG, adjusting service fees based on 100% of the CPIU during the past year. Do I have a motion in that regard?
I'd make a motion to approve both number 1 and number 2 as you just read, Chair.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Kira, would you pull that vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Okay, Mr. Ward, let's talk
Okay.
about change order.
Now back
I
to
guess-
that PowerPoint. The same one, yeah, please. Thank you so much. And then next slide. There we go. For Recology, the negotiations were just a little bit more complicated. The main thing was how we treat changes in tip fees. Under the contract, each of Recology's rates come in 3 components. There's a collection component, a transport component, and a disposal or recycling component. Right now, all of those components get adjusted by the changes to the CPI. And then when the brush or tip fees change by 5%, there's an additional adjustment under Recology's contract for those changes in rates. What we're suggesting under this change order is we drop the 5% trigger, and so each year as the rates change at the Del Norte County Transfer Station, the Recology rates are adjusted for those changes. There's no CPI percentage applied to the collection or tipping fee moving forward. And that makes sense because Recology's costs are really on the collection and the transport side. If they're paid adequately for the disposal side, then there's no CPI adjustment for that because the cost of delivering those services hasn't changed. So staff think this is a very reasonable proposal moving forward, and Recology is being held to the 4% cap under these rate changes. And so staff think this is quite acceptable in that most of the collection rates increase by less than 2%. Next slide, please. So you can see the changes here on the collection rates. And these rates have been reviewed by both Recology and us, so we're all agreeing on these numbers. And so staff recommend approval of change order 32.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Is there any questions or comments from the authority board members?
Just a technical question. So can we make that change to the contract simply through this change order? Okay,
Yes, we can, and I've confirmed that with legal counsel that this works.
okay. I just want to make sure that if we needed a separate action for the contract, that we did need to do that. So, thank you.
Very good. Any others? Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing no public comment, we'll bring it back to the board. We're looking for a motion to approve change order 22 with Recology Del Norte, adjusting collection fees based on the 4% annual cap to CPI, and changes to tipping fees for trash and brush. And the last item is direct staff to draft a rate resolution to enact these changes effective July 1st, 2023. Do we have such a motion?
So move.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Is there a second?
I would second that, just with the clarification that the changes we're talking about are both actions regarding change order 32 and change order 22.
Agreeable to that, Mr.
Agreeable.
Thompson? Okay. We have a motion and a second. Kira, would you pull that vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Okay, moving right along. Oop.
My only caveat is, for me,
We voted, you don't get a caveat.
if we could have a bit more public meeting time so we can kind of get that out ahead of the meeting, to the public, so they would maybe have more opportunity for input, so they know that the fee changes are coming.
That's part of the rate resolution process, yes, sir.
All righty, very good. We'll move on to 6.1.
I would say that because Hambro decided to attach a letter, it might be appropriate if Mr. Schlegel wants to say anything on that item, or you consider it said.
It's up to you, Dave.
Well, we do appreciate the fact that everybody is concerned about this inflationary period we're in. Particularly if, if we're looking at a 4 or 5% increase and you went to the store or the gas station, you'd recognize the fact that things have increased by more than 4 or 5%, particularly in transportation. Our transportation division is not profitable at this point, but the operations carries the company. But it's something I want to make you aware of, that I know you're aware of, but wanted a public statement. We are in a tough inflationary period. It dropped off here the last several months, so I think everybody thinks it's behind us, and possibly it is. But yeah, we need to be aware of it, so the next time we come before you with tears and handkerchiefs and stuff, you'll recognize you've heard this before. But we're all living it. Just wanted to make everybody aware of it.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that.
I appreciate the statement. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to get any better. I think we're going to end up moving in the opposite direction, and that's one of my biggest fears is for refuse and for solid waste, is that we already see the problems that we have with that portion of our community that is homeless, that is living out into those areas, and what happens with the amount of refuse that gets abandoned and built up in these areas. And as the cost associated with dumpage increases and dollars become much harder, not only for people to utilize, but for them to get the items that they do need, my fear is that the cost increases are going to result in more abandonment of trash and refuse in our community instead of at the dump site.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. All righty, moving along to 6.1, discussion and possible contractor selection based on proposals received by Clean Earth and Clean Harbors in response to the authority's household hazardous waste collection services request for proposals. Kira, are you going to take us forward on this one, or?
I think I'll start, and then,
Okay.
because Kira was the primary driver of this evaluation, if I miss anything, I'll ask her to pipe up.
Very good.
But it is very hard to both present and try to take minutes, having been in that role myself. I
Oh,
know that
I have
it's
every
pretty hard.
confidence you could do both.
So, in general, we got two proposals. One from the contractor that we're currently working with, Clean Harbors, and another one from a company called Clean Earth. In short, both are qualified, but Clean Earth's proposal was about 30% more expensive, but they have better environmental performance in that the way they manage the hazardous materials once they're collected, they seem to actually be ecologically conscious about how they manage those materials, whereas Clean Harbors seems to have access to some incinerators, and they're mostly just transporting to those facilities. So there's a difference in cost and a difference in management, and staff are recommending that we work with Clean Earth because of their improved management of those materials. But it would be a increased expense. There is a correction I need to add to that, in that I had a math error, and essentially, while Clean Earth does include an additional cost for each vehicle over 275, that cost in the report was miscalculated. So essentially, it would be an additional expense, but not much of one. So on the second page, I said that if there were, say, 295 customers instead of 275, the increase would be just $740. So it's not that much of an increase, but it is a difference.
It's on 18,500.
That's correct. I really
What
want
is
to
the
take that one
additional
off.
cost? per vehicle?
Just, it would be $740 for those additional 20 customers,
Per
so not too
vehicle,
bad.
it's $37.
Oh, okay, so it's not per, okay.
Not $925 per vehicle, it's
$37 per vehicle.
$37 per
Gotcha.
additional vehicle.
Okay.
And what has our average vehicle process been? I mean, how many have we serviced? through there?
We've been seeing decreasing numbers in general, but it's been some years since we've been at the 275 level. We're generally closer to the 200, 225 level.
We've been
we-
going, we've been going under 200 since I've been here. So for the past 5 years.
So we probably won't hit that ceiling, but it's a necessary part of the bid process because, of course, as the hazardous waste contractors gear up and they pack their trucks, they're packing for a certain volume of material, a certain number of customers. And so if their estimate is way off from what they receive, that can create problems and additional expenses.
So what are the two numbers for the two bids?
30,000 for Clean Harbors, and what's the,
30,000
Well,
more.
roughly, it was approximately 60,000 versus 90,000.
Okay.
So, but those were estimates based on our projections, and so it didn't seem right to put that before the board because what we received may be significantly different from that. But we needed to evaluate them somehow, and the short answer is generally Clean Earth was about 30% more expensive.
So I take it then that staff considers the difference, the ecological difference to be worth that difference?
Yes, is the short of it. We're an entity that is trying to do right and trying to follow through on the good intentions of our customers. So if people put aside materials for recycling or recovery, we feel it's our obligation to manage those materials as environmentally responsibly as we can. And so given a choice between these two contractors, one would handle those materials better according to what they're saying. And it's not reasonable for us to say, go back to Clean Harbors and say, we'd like to have you manage these materials differently.
is Clean Harbors handling the material in a way that's outside of the way that they should be, or acceptable
It's
practices?
perfectly legal. Everything they're doing is perfectly legal. But, for instance, they're incinerating virtually everything they can incinerate. And incineration is not allowed in California, so they ship to their incinerators. It's all legal, but the transport costs are significant.
And how does Clean Harbors deal with the same material?
I'm sorry, Clean Harbors does
Clean
do
Earth,
that.
I'm sorry, Clean
So,
Earth.
so for example,
Thank
take
you.
acids and bases. You may remember from high school chemistry that if you find the right base to mix with the right acid, you end up with salt water, which is pretty easy to manage legally, right? But that takes a process of neutralization. And so rather than choose neutralization, for example, for those acids and bases, Clean Harbors will incinerate them.
And what happens to the environment at those incinerators?
That's a good question. I don't immediately have the answer other than it is a permitted facility. So I assume that it's monitored and accordingly, but it's a permitted facility in the state in which it exists.
And
So-
they're in Utah and Nebraska, so it's
So the-
their laws.
So part of the environmental impact would be transportation. I think
Yep.
that's what I heard.
The combination of transportation and incineration. But it is a significant price difference, and we work for the board, so this is a discretionary choice of the board.
I'm curious, you said Clean Harbors was in Nebraska, Utah? Or did I get that backwards?
Clean
Earth.
Harbors. That's correct.
Their incineration facilities are in Nebraska and Utah, yes.
I know for me personally, at this point in time, after we, just get to the point where we're starting to see some black instead of all red, I hate to see us accept this burden, at this time. Now, as we hopefully can wade through what we're currently economically going through, and if we can continue to pay what we need to pay and keep what we need to keep and not run into financialists. I don't want to, for me, even though there's an offset of benefit, economically, I just think we need to be more frugal and resilient in our economic expenses, because, I think we're going to see need for those dollars in paying salaries and other things that are far more beneficial going forward than saving, spending $30,000 right now. But, it's not something I would be juxtaposed to, if go after we get through these and we're still in an economically good position to move forward with that, I would see no objection.
One other option available to the board is if you would like us to inquire or drill down on any aspect of this analysis, we have time and ability to do that.
You've done this analysis. What financial impact would it have on your budget?
I would anticipate it would cost an additional $30,000 to $40,000 to contract with Clean Earth rather than Clean Harbor on an annual basis.
Right, and how much room in your budget do you have for that kind of an increase? How would it?
I don't know yet. I'm in the process of budgeting, but I have not yet factored in those expenses and looked at how it lands.
Maybe that would be one thing that you could come back with.
I absolutely can and will next time we'll be talking about the budget. One of the things that it comes to mind is we have been making substantial contributions to our OPEB, to the other post-employment benefits. We've been submitting $140,000 annually. I think at this point we're further in the black on that front, so we might have some funds. But as you are correctly pointing out, there's still union negotiations. There's a number of things that are increasing expense lines in the coming budget.
Just a couple of things. Are any of the household hazardous waste events, is any of that through grant funding? I mean, we have portions of grants that cover a lot of different things. Is a portion of that event covered under grant funding?
An excellent question, and the answer is no.
Okay.
However, we continue to keep our ears to the ground about opportunities, and there has been recent discussion about the possibility of applying through the Office of Emergency Services to support these programs, and even to the point of maybe having more than one event a year. But I don't have enough details to know that that's a promising avenue yet, so we have to do a little bit more research. And if that appears that it might be available to us, then I'll come back and with a report and a recommendation.
Thank you. The second piece is not having any real knowledge about clean earth. I would at least be concerned about anybody that in the economy that we're in, anybody that claims that they are handling materials in a way that's ecologically responsible, because we've seen on so many fronts how difficult that is. And so outside of having some kind of contractual guarantee that a substantial portion of these are being handled differently than clean harbors, them saying these are our goals versus this is contractually how we will handle those, because the last thing I want to do is communicate to our customers that we changed to go to somebody who was going to have a track record and somebody that's going to be more responsible for environmental concerns, and that's why we're paying more, only to find out that this company aspires to those things but doesn't always do them.
I very much appreciate that expression. I should also mention that hazardous waste is managed pretty specifically in terms of the requirements. So in this case, we actually kind of have a guarantee in that when those materials are shipped off, they're shipped off under a manifest system. So we manifest everything that's going out, and then we get a copy back from the facility after they received it. So in no way is Clean Earth going to be able to get away with saying, all right, we're neutralizing these acid and bases and we're doing that at this facility. We're going to get a manifest back from that facility, or we're not. And if we don't get one, that's not what they're contracted to do. So they recognize there is definitely penalties that would be very hard for them to address if they didn't follow through on these commitments.
Yeah, there's a lot of checks and balances because different agencies need reporting to DTS, et cetera, and so we get all that information at the end.
I'd kind of like to hold this off for a little while, the decision, until you can bring back a little more information about potential funding sources and more clarity about the actual processes and the difference, and whether, a better idea of how, whether or not we can afford it.
Okay.
Without putting, as has been pointed out, without jeopardizing our financial situation.
So we'll take that as a motion to continue to next meeting?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Just clarification. So how I would proceed with that direction is I would send an email to each of the proposing companies explaining that we're waiting for another month, and then I would probably ask them some additional questions and or present that information with the draft budget. Does that sound reasonable?
Do you anticipate having the draft budget at our May meeting?
I do.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much more information that they're going to present to us, short of looking at their proposals. I think the bottom line is, and I guess maybe because I've sat here for 9 years, the $30,000 is not going to make or break our budget. It's really a matter of it's a stewardship question for me. It's not a financial question, because there's always a substantial amount of fluidity in our annual budget, and this is a small portion in relationship to all the things that we do. I'm just concerned about the stewardship piece, because I'm not sure what the benefit really is environmentally. I think, because I just don't know. I mean, neutralizing these things is great, but again, not knowing how this incineration process, is it a closed loop system? And frankly, and I don't necessarily like saying this, but I think that the vast majority of our people who come to our hazardous waste stuff just want the stuff gone. And so I guess maybe I do have some questions about whether or not choosing one from a stewardship standpoint moves the needle substantially from the standpoint of being stewards of our environment. And I don't know, you may not be able to answer that question for me either, but if it doesn't, then I'm left with the question really being, is dealing with a company that regularly is a pain in the rear end to deal with from a billing standpoint worth $30,000? And I don't know how big of, I know I have heard it every year that's an issue. I don't know. Is that, so those are just questions that I have, and I guess we can take it back up when we look at the budget, but I don't think that the $30,000 is a budget make or break. Obviously I have other questions besides just the dollars.
I did have a question, you know, with the comment in the board report here about challenges with billing, but at the same time, I have the same concerns as you. You, of course, state them way more eloquently than I can. But I mean, you speak smartly when you talk about, you know, they are incinerating it, but is it a closed loop system? What are they exhausting into the environment? We don't know. So, I mean, those are, I think, questions that we probably should get answered before we decide to expend an extra 30 or 40 grand each year. So, I think they're smart questions, and continuing to the next meeting would, I agree with, but we do have a motion to continue. Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing no public comment, Kara, would you poll the vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Thank you for that discussion there. Moving on to 6.2, discussion and possible action regarding sending support letters to legislators regarding SB 707 by Fullerton, AB 863 by Winters, and AB 1790 by Rivas. Ted, you got
I'll cover the first bills first, and then we'll talk more extensively about SB 707, which was continued. The first two bills, first one is AB 863 from Winters, and this bill would make a carpet stewardship organization that violates a provision of the carpet stewardship law 3 times ineligible to act as an agent on behalf of manufacturers to design, submit, and administer a carpet stewardship plan. More or less what this means is that the current organization overseeing carpet recovery under the Product Stewardship Program in California is the Carpet America Recovery Effort. Repeatedly, they have violated some provisions of their compliance plan with CalRecycle, and probably one of the things that has irritated CalRecycle to no small degree is they collect funds from everybody who buys new carpet, and the purpose for those collection of funds is to set up the recycling system. They've used some of those funds to lobby the legislature so that they don't have as many requirements to meet. So CalRecycle feels that that's not what the product stewardship program is supposed to be for. It's not so you can collect funds, so you can lobby, so you have reduced responsibilities. It's actually so to collect funds to create recycling systems that work. And if you're not using those funds to do that, then there's a problem. So that's what this bill would address. The other bill is AB 1290 from Rivas, and essentially that reduces some of the additives that are put into polyethylene terephthalate bottles, PET bottles, commonly used for soda bottles. But think of the clear soda bottles versus the green soda bottles, because that's pretty much what we're talking about. Green soda bottles are not so recyclable. Clear soda bottles, recyclable every time. So by eliminating that green dye, it may reduce some marketing, but it increases recyclability. So that's the reason for that particular law. So staff recommend support for both of those bills. And perhaps we should take discussion on if there is any on that before diving into SB 707.
Very good, we can do that. Is there any questions or comments about the two letters for AB 863 and 1290, I'm
Yeah,
sorry?
1290, I don't have, I have no contention or at least questions on. My big question on AB 863 is how many of these violations have we experienced, exposed, or dealt with in the state that would warrant jacking up the penalty fees as high as they're going?
Well, the problem is that when they're not meeting their stewardship laws, and they're not doing anything. They're responding by saying, make us.
Well, yeah, but you have an enforcement mechanism. How many times have we had to initiate this enforcement mechanism against vendors? It sounds like you only got one. That makes this necessary. Because again, we keep increasing violation fees, and then we continue to cudgel these into submission. And in the process, we rake in millions and sometimes billions of dollars through legal aspects of the state of California, and then we waste the money. I mean, I don't want to see us, again, jacking up something that doesn't, that's going to eventually hit the consumer. I don't want to see us jacking up rates unnecessarily unless there's a problem. And, what I read here, it doesn't indicate an issue warranting the penalties to go up so extraordinarily high from $5,000 to $10,000 a day to $50,000 a day for violations if there haven't been enforcement processes and problems, that warrant this kind of a thing to be done at this time. So, I mean, the threat is a threat unless it's utilized. And if it has not been utilized at its existing, fee and fine, then, it doesn't make any sense to jack it up. That's, I want to see the reason, justification for doing it.
My understanding is that essentially the Carpet America recovery effort is not meeting the terms of their recovery plan, and CalRecycle is challenged to find an enforcement mechanism that will encourage them to do so.
Well, it looks like there's already an enforcement mechanism. They're just wanting to increase the violations per day cost.
But if the enforcement, anyway, my understanding is that the enforcement mechanisms that are in place are not reaching compliance. And there is only one organization responsible for carpet recycling in California. So if that organization is not doing their job and there's no effective enforcement mechanism, there is no entity to do that job.
Well, and that's like I say, I'd have to see what enforcement has already engaged in prior to seeing a need for additional penalties to be added to this.
Okay.
For me, anyway. I mean, the other members may support it, but I couldn't support it the way it is.
Very good. Mr. Inscore?
Well, the challenge is the stewardship organizations have a contractual responsibility when they apply for this the responsibility that they take on to meet certain standards. If they don't meet those standards, then they need to be held accountable to that. And this is not the only stewardship group that fails to meet its obligations. One that directly impacts us often is the mattress group. So I don't have a problem with putting the hammer down on a group that is making a lot of money, and then using that money to turn around and lobby to try to have to do less, because that's really what they're doing. Is they get a lot of money to handle these materials, and then they use all the money that they're making then to turn around to lobby to say, we shouldn't have to do so much with what we said that we would do, and so, I don't feel sorry for somebody that likes to take in the revenue, but doesn't want to hold to the responsibility that goes with what they were paid to do.
I have no problem with that either. However, what I have a problem with is if there's no justification for jacking up the penalty fees if they haven't already been utilized, if they've never been utilized.
Oh, yeah.
And there's no indication that this is the problem. So, I mean, my issue is, if you're asking for a rate increase, a penalty increase, well, show me where it's the existing ones have failed. Don't tell me, you know, I mean, the fact that they're utilizing their money to lobby against what they're doing, welcome to the club. I mean, show me one, one group that doesn't lobby against having to do more.
Well, the difference, and I'm not taking issue with what you're saying, I just want to clarify what a product stewardship program is. A product stewardship program generally establishes a product stewardship organization, usually one, but sometimes a small number. But essentially, that organization becomes responsible for making recycling work for that product. So the Carpet America recovery effort is responsible for making carpet recycling work in California. And they're allowed to essentially assess a fee for everybody buying new carpet to make that carpet recycling program work. And so if they're not doing that, they're allowed to collect a fee without necessarily delivering a service, which is kind of like taxation without services. So even though it's collected by businesses for businesses, if the services aren't delivered, then that's a system that won't work.
And I have no problem with that. However, what I do have a problem with is asking for a penalty increase, but I'm seeing no indication, no statement of a history that shows that enforcement has been made and it has failed time and time again, and the need for increasing penalties is warranted.
I would be happy to return with some information on that.
For me, now they may all feel differently, but that's my issue of it.
Well, I think passing a cost of legislation down to the consumer is a concern. It's a good point, and I don't know how to read that in this particular case either, whether this additional penalty will get passed down to the consumer or not. So, so it's a great question. We need to open this up to public comment for these two letters of support for AB 863 and AB 1290. Is there any public comment? Seeing no public comment, I'll bring it back to the board. We'll take these one by one. A motion at this time is appropriate for AB 863 for the Carpet Stewardship Council.
I would just ask that we postpone this and let Director Ward and we can do it on our own, do some further research before we take any action on this letter. I think it would be appropriate to educate ourselves as best we can before we determine yes or no on this subject.
Okay, we have a motion to continue this item. If time permits, I don't know what our timeline is for the comment period, but we have a motion to continue this item. Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Kara, would you pull that vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Okay, AB 1290, talking about the recyclability of PET containers.
I'd make a motion that we send a support letter for AB 1290.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Kara, would you pull that vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Wilson?
Yes.
Commissioner Inscore?
Yes.
Chair Short?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for
Mr.
that
Ward?
very healthy discussion. I really welcome the engagement from the board on these issues, and regardless of how the positions end up falling, it's really helpful to have us all be more educated about how the current system works and how folks are trying to improve it and what you think is the best way to improve these systems. So thank you.
Yeah, and as we go forward, one of my biggest concerns on especially when we're dealing with plastics is the movement towards the biodegradable process, and what it's done environmentally is it's created micro particles in plastic, because they don't really, even though they break apart, they don't necessarily, over time, they don't go away. And we're seeing plastic microbeads in fish, and we're seeing it in our animal life, we're seeing it everywhere, and we're seeing it in the meat. So, the consumer is getting these, small doses of plastic. And so even in our efforts to be environmentally conscious, we're creating a problem that we have no solution for at this time.
I really appreciate you mentioning that because I actually had a really great conversation with Assemblymember Wood's office, and were carrying a bill, AB 1489, that essentially would waive a lot of requirements of such bioplastics and essentially put them in a completely different category. I was very concerned about that for the same reasons that you're mentioning, but essentially they don't work with our composting systems, they don't work with our recycling systems, and so that bill has changed significantly, and I really appreciate the engagement of Wood's office on that. Now shall we discuss SB 707?
Yes, please.
Rachel, if I could have that slideshow. So the board at the last meeting asked for a little bit more information about SB 707 and why this system might make sense and why it's being proposed. So this, most of this slideshow presentation has been prepared by the California Product Stewardship Council, which is an advocate of this bill. Next slide, please. So, and we are members of the California Product Stewardship Council. You can see we're one of those green counties. And next slide. So textiles in general are a significant portion of the waste stream, about 3%, a little over 3%, and it's growing. Next slide. And looking at a waste sort that was done in Los Angeles, they're looking at approximately 6% of the materials disposed in their black bin as being textiles. Next slide. So this is a large and growing problem. It's accumulating in landfills globally. It includes many industries, so you've got uniforms, linens, other hospitality, textiles, and there are 275 unique blends of fibers that are used for clothing or textiles, and the federally mandated labels don't really have enough information for recyclers or upcyclers or folks who are trying to process those materials. And furthermore, there's limited transparency in that it's not clear sometimes what materials these are made for or what their usability is. Next. So one of the reasons why this is making such progress in California and why many of the garment manufacturers are actually supporting this development in California is that similar policies are being considered worldwide for textiles, and California is one of the more workable systems. And so garment manufacturers are coming in support of this, and there's very little to no opposition at this point that CPSC is aware of. So there are efforts at product stewardship for textiles in France, Sweden, Spain, the UK, Canada, and Netherlands are all considering it, as well as the EU. So this is an active policy area, and it's a global problem. Next slide, please. So before developing this legislation, CPSC engaged in several recovery pilot projects to see which systems work best and how to further support those. So here's an example of some of those pilot projects. And next slide, please. So the purple areas would be the areas that would be funded by the Product Stewardship Organization. The key thing about this system is that it all goes at the back end of thrift stores and resale shops. So there isn't an effort to try to collect this up front. It's all at the back end of the thrift stores and the resale shops. It also provides supports for garment cleaning and repairing businesses and would make collection of textiles more practical for local governments such as ourselves. The purple areas would be funded by the PRO, so that includes education on proper waste reduction and drop-off locations, and would also support secondary sorting for repair, recycling, and disposal. And then some minimal support for both thrift stores and resale shops. Next slide, please. So how does this bill address global textile waste? It internalizes the costs because it's 100% producer funded. The PRO sets the fees, and then those go into the purchase price of clothing. And the PRO, Product Stewardship Organization, is responsible for the distribution of those fees. There's global accountability in that there are clear definitions and program performance standards, and there's responsibility until those textiles find their proper home. And part of the reason to that motivates our dealing with this is that when a lot of bales of textiles are shipped overseas, they're often sold in open markets, and then what doesn't get sold gets dumped, like you're seeing here along the Nairobi River. And as a former Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, I can certainly confirm that the open markets had small mountains of T-shirts and other textiles that were shipped from U.S. thrift stores, and they all had English writing on the T-shirts, and it was all pretty clear. So it was a problem back in 1990, and it's only grown since then. Next slide, please. So how is product stewardship as an approach to textiles management good for business? This is a comprehensive approach to an increasing problem of disposal in California and pollution globally. Anybody who's done a cleanup in Del Norte County knows a lot of that cleanup is clothing. This is a business-driven program. The Textile Product Stewardship Organization would be comprised of producers. It would set internalized fees to create and promote robust recovery, collections, and processing from thrift stores and other collectors, and do associated outreach. The financial support for thrift stores and garment cleaning and repair businesses would come through this system, as well as washing, textile sorting, and recycling. So there are far more local jobs in thrift stores and garment cleaning and repair businesses than there are supported locally by just paying to landfill those materials. The fees are set by the Product Stewardship Organization. There isn't a government entity that sets those fees. It would be the Product Stewardship Organization. But similarly to the carpet program we just discussed, the oversight of performance by the Product Stewardship Organization is monitored by CalRecycle. I could go into further details, but that's the overview of the SB 707, and I think some of the more compelling arguments to support it, if you're so inclined. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Anybody got any questions for Mr. Ward? No? Is there any public comment on this item? Bringing it back to the board then, we'll close public comment on this item and entertain a motion if anybody sees fit.
Well, number one, we're really early in this bill. My biggest concern is they really have not put together yet a financial analysis of what is this number that they may guess as far as the cost to the consumer in order to put together this entire recovery system. And until there's a little bit more financial analysis of what does it take to bring in this entire back of house, collect it all, and by the way, we're going to collect it all, and we're going to charge enough for textiles so that we can then pay the people who are going to do all of this and recycle it. I'm sorry, this number could be huge, and we don't. That financial analysis hasn't been done yet, which is why the League of Cities support this in concept. But they're not willing to give us support. CSAC's not willing to sign on to this bill yet because till it gets into a stronger analysis from a financial standpoint, I think that would be prudent for us to also watch, not take a stance. That's just me from what I have read so far.
I would be happy to follow the League of Cities and how they pursue this bill, but I feel I should mention the fees that are set by the Product Stewardship Organization. And so there's no way to, because what a Product Stewardship bill does is it says, you need to set up an organization that's going to be responsible for the following things. And you're going to be allowed, as that organization, to collect these additional fees on these kinds of items. So until the Product Stewardship Program is formed, they don't know what those fees are going to be, and there's no way to know because nobody's responsible for setting up that program until there's that organization. So the information you're asking for won't be available.
That's partially true. From a legislative analysis they will take they're not going to produce a bill and enact into law something that has not had some fiscal analysis attached to it. We're not going to get, I'm not going to find out how much more every t-shirt's going to cost. But they will at least have, this is going to be a $1 billion a year program. This is going to be a $10 million a year program. There will be some legislative analysis of this financially before, I would hope. If not, then it's like, well, let's just legislate something, and then we'll figure out how much it's going to cost afterwards, which is, I also know that happens. It's just not good governance. So I have a lot more questions about what the cost is going to be back to the consumer before I'm ready to jump into this. And I think that, you know, when legislative advocates such as CSAC and League of Cities are still waiting to weigh in on this on an official capacity, that's usually a pretty good cue from my vantage point that maybe we should pause a little bit myself. But again, I'm just speaking for me, so.
You know, on my half, the reason why I pulled it last time, again, is added cost to the consumer. I'm not in favor of that, especially in California, where we're already adding too much damn cost to our things anyway. But the other thing, too, is in reading the legislation, it was very targeted, or at least intended to be targeted on primarily those clothing items which are made of fabrics that don't deteriorate in our environment. Those are plastics and nylons and you know, things that we have in shoes. Now, if something was designed more targeted towards those items, I would probably be more considerate of that. You know, I mean, the people that make the backpacks and the shoes and the rainwear, you know, those things that aren't going to be easily handled by either, you know, waste disposal. The eventual deterioration is not going to occur there. And so the recycling and the need for stewardship on those things I could see. Whereas a t-shirt or clothing or a pair of pants, I mean, you know, I mean, that's what thrift stores live off of. And Goodwill makes a great business and a great, you know, economic driver. They're very robust, and so they don't need more help. So
I would have thought that would be all part of the bill. Those considerations would be part of the process. I would have thought. I will say this. I think the consumer should pay more. I think there should be some burden borne by the consumer as well as by the manufacturer and the resale people, everybody in between. All of us should pay. This planet is more important than that. That's my opinion.
yeah, and unfortunately, trust me, none of these businesses bear the cost. It all comes back to the consumer.
Well, thank you for the discussion. It doesn't seem like we are going to come to a place where we will have a motion in this, in support of this at this time.
I want us to continue to watch it and have this discussion.
I
mean,
agree.
again, we're early on in this legislation.
Your comments about, you know, CSAC, League of Cities, RCRC, those are our advocates out there that are watching legislation. We do, you know, place a pretty good amount of trust in them because they're watching. And when they do give their opinion, they'll tell us why. It's for this reason or that. So it does seem like there's quite a few holes in this, in my opinion, as well, Mr. Inscore. It's like there's a big gap on, you know, what this could cost, and consumer costs seems a bit premature for me to,
But for me,
to say one way or the other that I would be in support of
I'm
it.
very appreciative of the presentation and of it putting it together and giving me information to dwell on. I appreciate your time and your effort. I do. And it's not wasted. I truly thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. So based on this discussion, shall I just keep watching this? And if it comes out that the League of Cities and CSAC come in support of this bill, that I might bring it back?
Or even significant changes that come as it goes through committee. I mean, I would appreciate you continuing to keep watch on it, and if there's significant movement as it makes its way through committee, or, yeah, I think, bring it back to us, because it obviously is a issue. And it may be that I just have a bad taste in my mouth when it comes to organizations who have been tasked to do this, that seem to know how to make a lot of money and don't always deliver the results of what they were commissioned to do. And so if part of that is my negativity, then I will own that. But we've seen that. We're seeing that. And so creating a new one that when others have not been responsible, just makes me cringe a little bit, so.
Okay.
Okay,
So
with that, we are going to adjourn into closed session. We do not plan on that there will be anything to report out from closed session at this time. So at this point, we will adjourn till our next scheduled, or after closed session, we'll adjourn for our next regularly scheduled meeting, Tuesday, May 16th, right here, 4 p.m.